Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is a novel that has captivated readers for centuries. The novel owes its rich psychological depth to its exploration of guilt, redemption, and moral responsibility. From a Catholic perspective, the novel is a rich witness to the need for repentance, the power of a redemptive spirit, and the action of God's grace and salvation. Raskolnikov's Odyssey through the lens of Catholic teaching emphasizes the need for conscience and redemption in Christian theology. Central to Crime and Punishment is Raskolnikov's sin, the murder of the pawnbroker Alanya Ivanovna. Raskolnikov rationalizes this as a product of his theory of the extraordinary man, believing himself to be above the moral code that restrains common men. However, from a Catholic perspective, his actions represent a manifestation of original sin, a rebellion against God's order. Raskolnikov's evil is a manifestation of the evil of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. When Adam and Eve give way to the serpent's temptation, that they would be as a god if they eat the forbidden fruit, Raskolnikov tricks himself into thinking that he can act as God, determining the lives of those around him. This is an act of pride that takes him outside to the moral community of God, sending him into darkness. Kauer's analysis of Raskolnikov's psychological torment sheds light on how his sin disorders both the soul and the mind. His desperate rationalizations collapse under the weight of his conscience, mirroring Catholic teaching on how guilt remains even when rationalized. St. Augustine, for instance, describes sin in his Confessions as a state of restlessness until the soul remains at peace with God. Raskolnikov's guilt reflects his profound spiritual unrest, proving that no rationalization by the intellect can silence the voice of conscience. Catholic teaching holds that suffering, united to the passion of Christ, is redemptive. Raskolnikov's suffering, both bodily and mental, ultimately leads him to repentance. Raskolnikov, throughout the novel, experiences extreme agony, which can be understood as purgatorial experience. He becomes alienated from the world, sick, and finds it impossible to sleep despite attempts to suppress his conscience. Of course, this corresponds to the Catholic teaching of purgatory, as purification prior to reintegration with God. Gabor's distinction between moral and legal responsibility is particularly important here. Gabor argues that Raskolnikov tries first to escape punishment from the outside believers, believes that the avoidance of legal judgment will allow him to retain mastery over his own fate. However, his moral suffering is considerably more unbearable than any worldly affliction. And this affirms the Catholic doctrine that final justice is not merely a creation of human law, but also of heavenly vengeance, as was stated by Pope Benedict XVI. The fire of Christ's love burns the soul, transforming and purifying it. Raskolnikov's agony just so happens to cleanse him in preparation for redemption. Sonia serves as a Christ figure to guide Raskolnikov towards salvation. Sonia embodies Christian virtues of humility, faith, and self-denial. She perseveres in her belief in God's mercy in spite of her own suffering, and gives Raskolnikov unconditional love. Sonia's reading of the miracle of Lazarus' resurrection in the Gospel of John is the most climatic moment of the novel. The biblical narrative is a foreshadowing of Raskolnikov's own spiritual resurrection. As Christ resurrects Lazarus from the dead, Sonia's faith is what resurrects Raskolnikov from his mortal death. In Catholic theology, the story of Lazarus is often depicted as a parable of repentance and the ability of Christ to raise the dead spiritually. Raskolnikov is alive physically, but dead spiritually because of his sin. Sonia, like Christ, in patience and love, invites him to repentance and faith. Her insistence that he publicly confesses and submit to punishment mirrors the Catholic sacrament of reconciliation, in which confession and penance are necessary steps of forgiveness. The Crime and Punishment epilogue emphasizes once more that the Catholic doctrine of redemption, by suffering and grace, it is only after much hesitation that Raskolnikov finally admits to the crime and embraces his punishment. This is significant as it is his admission to divine justice, not just legal penalty. His confession is a work of contrition, the heart of a Catholic repentance. Contrition is defined in the Catechism of the Catholic Church as sorrow of the soul, detestation for the sin committed, together with the resolution not to sin again. CCC 1451. In his confession, Raskolnikov owns up to his moral failures and begins the spiritual healing process. Additionally, his final hours in the novel suggest a new beginning. The epilogue narrates how he will slowly start changing Visanya's unwavering love and devotion leading Raskolnikov. His road to redemption is not abrupt but ongoing, conforming to the Catholic belief in sanctification, a process of growing in saintliness throughout life.